Dogman in the polar bear tank. Dear Scary Stories NYC, a recent Dogman sighting by an old friend is what drew me to your channel and a few others that cover the subject of werewolf-like creatures. My friend we can call Laura and I had been closer in the past, but she makes a lot more money than I do now, so we mostly hang out in different circles. When she mentioned her Dogman sighting on Facebook, I saw that she was met with ridicule and derision by her modern friends. I saw that she deleted the post, saying it was just a joke that failed. I messaged her privately, telling her that my old Michigan family has our own Dogman legend dating back to the first half of the 20th century. I assured her that if she shared her story with me, I wouldn't laugh at her. After a while, we got to be fairly good internet friends, and eventually one night she spilled her guts to me about what exactly happened. She's given me permission to explain what she went through, and then I'd like to tell you my own family's Detroit Dogman story. So my friend Laura had been hiking with her husband in the Highland Recreation Area in White Lake, Michigan. This was just at the end of the summer of this past year. She said they entered a clearing with these sort of modern ruins around the place. They found an oval-shaped wall and climbed down into it. Her husband had flirted with her about making out inside that circular structure, but once they both got inside there, they felt strangely uncomfortable. Laura said she heard a brief whizzing sound and then something large hit the ground very hard behind them, causing both to cry out in surprise. Turning around, they saw a huge, naked, hairy man with a head so deformed that it looked more like a wolf head than a human head. Since of course she didn't have time to snap a photo, I'm only able to go on her description, and she seemed to think it was a human being, deformed to look like a dog. The way she says it gives me the vibes of a werewolf more than a Dogman, but then again, I may be placing too much meaning on a turn of phrase. It's possible I'd see the same thing and call it a Dogman or a Wolfman. It seemed basically humanoid, since she said naked hairy man and not upright walking canine or wolf, but this is my inference from her implication, and I can't be sure we're on the same wavelength. So, the Dogman, or whatever it was, circled in one direction, and the two of them circled in the other. Then Laura's husband struggled out of his backpack and got out his flare gun. He fired the flare directly at the face of the creature, who ran off, easily leaping over the enclosure and escaping quickly. Laura and her husband put out the small fire that the flare had caused. Then they too climbed out of the oval enclosure, albeit far more slowly than the Dogman had. I told Laura about the Michigan Dogman, and at first she seemed grateful for the info. After some time though, I think she wanted the subject to go away. So I try not to bring it up and mainly just say happy birthday and happy holidays to her these days. You know, I remember when Laura was finished telling me her story the first time, she asked me, how crazy is it that the entire thing happened only 40-something miles north of Detroit, Michigan? I told her that my family has its own Dogman legend in it, and the story is supposed to have taken place 1 block north of Detroit. Granted, this story is supposed to have happened a long time ago. Listening to your bear story from a recent episode, I was instantly reminded of my old family legend. It even has a similar scene of Dogman battling a bear in water. Both stories seem to indicate that Dogman isn't just terrifying and dangerous. He's also kind of a complete jerk too. So next, I'd like to tell you a story that my family says is true, concerning the first ever polar bear zoo exhibit in Detroit, and how it got closed down by the Michigan Dogman. These days, the Detroit Zoo features one of the largest polar bear exhibits on the surface of the earth, also known as the Arctic Ring of Life. The story my father used to tell me, which he claimed that his uncle Seamus told him, is supposedly about that show's predecessor, the very first polar bear exhibit in the Detroit Zoo. It went terribly wrong because of the Michigan Dogman, at least according to our family legend. Now, it must be said in all fairness that my dad admitted that Uncle Seamus had a reputation for being able to spin a wild tale, and even Seamus insisted that you'd never find evidence to prove this story's truth. According to Great Uncle Seamus, this was because of the grand cover-up that ensued after the events which I'm about to describe to you. There were a few attempts to create a Detroit Zoo going back as far as 1883, but the one that stuck, the one that is still open and still called the Detroit Zoo, opened in the summer of 1928 on Woodward Avenue north of 10 Mile Road. These days, the zoo and its neighbor, the Rackham Golf Course, are located in a densely populated area. But imagine it back in 1911, when the Detroit Zoological Society first started looking for land. This area is technically not even Detroit anymore. It's Huntington Woods, which is a different city entirely. The name Huntington Woods conjures up images of abundant forests filled with all manner of living creatures, both large and small. Maybe there was still a lot of that left in the early part of the 20th century, which is literally 100 years ago. Maybe in those days the Dogman really were able to live and hunt that close to the city of Detroit. That's the basic conceit of this family story. You have to assume that a wild man, or an upright walking canine, was in the area as the zoo was originally being built. The description was like the modern description of Dogman, at least in some ways, like a wolf-headed animal man. But at other points in the narrative, I remember my father describing an oversized four-footed dog. I can't really tell which parts were artifacts of my father's storytelling style, or from those he had been told the story by. I'm just going to try to tell it how I remember, and you can tell me how much of it might be real, and which parts. Some days I believe all of it, other days none of it, but most of the time I live in that in-between place. If this story really is about the zoo that I think it's about, then this was one of the first modern zoos designed without bars so that the animals could be seen in some sort of impersonation of their natural habitat. But even if this was a more old-fashioned kind of enclosure, we know that the bears had cold water to swim in at the very least because the cold water figures into the story. The way it was told to me, the zoo was not open to the public yet, but some of the animals were living there already, and so guards and feeders were needed. My great-uncle Seamus got a low-level gig cleaning up animal poo and making sure the lions didn't eat the gazelles. So, one night, his boss we can call Bartholomew gathered all the men and warned them that he's seen a very strange-looking dog lurking around the premises. The boss, being uptight about some big dark-furred dog he saw, seemed kind of funny to half the men. But the other half of the men thought he was talking about the Michigan Dogman, and so they went on to full alert, ready for anything. Uncle Seamus was part of the group that thought it was funny. He figured the boss was playing head games and trying to sucker the more gullible guys into working harder than they needed to work. So it came time for Seamus to guard an entry gate one overnight, and of course it went badly. Besides alcohol and womanizing, Uncle Seamus's only vice was gambling, and stealing and lying. But gambling is the one that mattered on that night, as Seamus left his post to play cards with some of the other guys. Just before dawn, there was a whole lot of noise coming from the polar bear exhibit. Crashing sounds, roaring sounds, and what sort of sounded like the sound of a really big, vicious dog barking and snarling. When Seamus finally got over there, he was surprised to find the polar bears in their outside enclosure. Each night, the animals were locked back inside, so what he was seeing shouldn't have been happening. And then, one of the other men pointed out to Uncle Seamus that there was a large black hairy beast in with the white hairy ones. He asked Seamus if he remembered any skinny black bears, and then, at once, the two of them put it all together. The stories that the boss had been telling them about seeing some sort of large feral dog outside the property weren't made-up scary stories to frighten the more gullible men into working harder. He really had seen what he told him that he saw, and now Uncle Seamus had carelessly allowed the creature entry to the zoo, where it somehow broke into the polar bear enclosure. Now the bears were either coming out or already out, and each of them in turn was being challenged by the big angry dog. That dog wasn't just large, as they had been previously informed. It also stood up, in much the way that the polar bears did when challenged. And when the canine stood up, he was every bit as tall as the tallest of the bears. The first time I heard this story, I didn't understand why an upright walking canine would break into the zoo if it wasn't to take advantage of the captive herbivore species, you know? I remember asking about that and being told that the Michigan Dogman must have disliked the idea of the polar bears on his turf. Since the park wasn't open to the public yet, maybe the bears were the only predators on the site at that point. Dad had a couple of other possible reasons it happened, which I forget. I think he was just throwing ideas at me and hoping one would stick. Maybe you can explain that part to me better than he could, because if I were a carnivore predator, I'd probably be dining on the pheasant instead of fighting with the alpha predators. So they had these nets and they had these noose things at the ends of long sticks, and they tried to get the Dogman away from the bears. The Dogman was as fast as any living creature could be, though, and it was hyper excited. Since it just wanted a fight, it didn't care which bear it fought with. If the nooses and nets were over here, he'd go attack a bear over there. When someone succeeded in bringing over some bright lights to help the men with their work, the Dogman climbed out of there faster than an Olympic sprinter. He made leaps that no man or bear could ever have made, and he raced off into the night. The men were too shaken up to chase the Dogman, and decided to focus on getting the bears back inside their enclosure. According to the family legend, the doors to the bear enclosure had somehow been bashed in and weakened until they opened. Either a bunch of strong men and a battering ram had been there, or the Michigan Dogman was as fierce as a battering ram. Obviously, at dawn, the entire park had to be searched by the men to see if the Dogman was still on the grounds hiding someplace. The men really didn't appreciate this new duty, and they blamed my careless and lazy Uncle Seamus for putting them in this situation in the first place. Seamus argued that the way the animal man could leap up walls, it didn't matter how many people they had guarding the gates. Heck, that creature could scale any wall of the zoo. It didn't even need to use a gate to get in. Resenting that he was blamed for the Dogman incident, Uncle Seamus resolved to patrol the border of the zoo every night, all night, until the Dogman was captured or done away with. And Uncle Seamus actually did patrol the zoo too, for a night, then part of a second night. By then, he had decided that the Dogman attack had been a fluke. What were the chances of that ever happening again? These days, if security gets breached, everyone on the freaking planet has to get nude scanned forever afterward, but it seems like in those days, you could let a dangerous animal into your perimeter to do expensive property damage, and then all you do is patch the doors back together and go back to playing cards. So, yeah, as you'd expect, the Dogman broke back in after a week or two. And yeah, as you'd expect, he headed straight for the polar bear enclosure. Supposedly, the new alarm they put up woke my great uncle, and he ran over to find the big bull bear in the outside enclosure, furiously facing off against the Michigan Dogman once again. And by this point, I'm wondering what they made these security doors out of in the 1920s. Balsa wood? How is a dumb animal able to break through your security not once but twice? At any rate, the Dogman and the largest of the bears both fell into the freezing cold water and continued their fighting in there. One wall of the polar bear's water tank was made of glass, so that paying customers could stand below and watch the polar bears as they swam. Well, that glass wall is not what was supposed to have broken, but the edges of the two walls on either side of it did. The two behemoths slamming into each other in the sides of that big basin began to chip away at the connecting edges until the structure started to buckle and water began at first seeping and then pouring into the tourist area downstairs, which obviously was closed down for the evening. When it finally gave way, water, bears, and a large sopping wet canine spilled out and through the entire first floor lobby. The Dogman slammed through the glass and steel entrance doors, and the polar bears followed him out onto the streets of either Detroit or Huntington Woods, depending on which zoo this actually is supposed to have happened at. So the zoo fired Uncle Seamus, and they were threatening to sue him for damages, which he couldn't have paid for in a dozen lifetimes. Seamus, in return, insisted that he should be hailed as a hero for all his work done in corralling the escaped polar bears and bringing them back into the zoo. He demanded a medal as a lifesaver and threatened to sue the zoo for something or whatnot. The zoo ended up paying him a small monthly lifetime stipend in exchange for his silence, and you would think that Seamus would have lived happily ever after from then on. The trouble was, he'd spend his stipend on drink at the local bar, and then he'd tell the entire story to anyone he could get to listen. The story that he was receiving a stipend to keep quiet about. So that's how he lost his monthly stipend and passed away a lonely, broke, and hungry man. I heard this family legend from my father, who had heard it from the horse's mouth, as well as versions from Seamus's contemporaries, giving their perspectives. In spite of Seamus's reputation as a teller of tall tales, this one seemed to have been remembered by the family, or at least by my dad, as a true account of Seamus's incompetence. Because of him, the zoo was forced to cover up what happened. That was the way Dad saw it. My mother told me about her mother-in-law's version of all this. Since she was Seamus's sister, her narrative would include private insults about Seamus, largely concerning his lack of restraint when it came to imbibing certain kinds of liquids and entertaining certain kinds of young women. According to Mom, that was the most entertaining version of the story that she ever got to hear. But unfortunately, I was born too late to get to hear it told that way. When a story gets as old as this one, it becomes lore as much as fact, assuming that it ever actually was based on fact, which I must remind you is still only an assumption. Just because a few friends and relatives accept it as true, doesn't mean it has to have actually happened. After all, my relatives believe some crazy things. You'll just have to trust me. Underneath it all for me personally, though, is the way people for generations have been reporting these incidents with something that they think is a dogman or werewolf in Michigan and the surrounding areas. Whether it's a bear with mange, or a hallucination, or an undiscovered species, or a visitor from a parallel dimension, one thing is for sure. As a topic of interest, at the very least, the Dogman is most definitely alive. Addendum. After I sent that email to you, I showed it to my mother. I should have done it the other way around, because she remembers one thing very differently. In her memory, this whole story was about an earlier version of the zoo which failed. This event, in fact, was part of the failure. She insists that it was not the current Detroit Zoo. According to my mother, the part about the zoo having to cover up evidence probably had more to do with insurance than a conspiracy to keep the Dogman a secret. That's if there were any truth to that part at all. She seemed surprised about this information, as she'd never heard the way my dad told the story. She'd heard the versions that the prior generation told along with her husband before I was born, but she had never been in the room when Dad told his version to me. Sadly, my father is no longer with us, so I can't ask him the way he remembered it. We were never the kind of family who were very interested in ourselves or our self-images. We rarely took photographs, and we all hated to be in front of a microphone or camera. For these reasons, we only have our memories to go on when it comes to our own history. I really wish I had valued our family legends when I was younger, so that I could have a far earlier and more accurate account to tell you of the Dogman in the polar bear tank. More serious than a serve subpoena, more musical than a concertina, there's nobody we'd rather Cena than executive producer Jason Regina. Please join us in thanking tonight's executive producer Jason Regina, who recently rejoined our channel memberships. In return, Jason gets to see our secret Sunday scary uncensored stories far too wild to run on this channel. We're always so happy to see former channel members return, as it means they miss the uncensored stories as much as we miss them. You can help us out a great deal, especially in these uncertain times, if you become a Scary Stories executive producer too, by either joining our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com, or else by clicking that join button under this or any of our videos to become a Scary Stories channel member. And now here is international TV spokesmongrel Henry Lee Dogman to fill in any details I may have left out. Hank? Thanks for watching till the end. If you liked what you saw, please consider clicking like on the video or sharing it with your friends and family that you think might also be interested. If you would like to see more of our work, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon next to the subscribe button so that YouTube will alert you when we put out a new video. To become a channel member and gain access to our special perks, you can click that join link under each of our videos. Another option is to join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. You can join for as little as 99 cents on YouTube or $1.50 at peterbernard.com, and that gains you access to our weekly secret uncensored episodes. If you'd like to see our 21 hours of archives of uncensored Dogman stories, then please join at the $3 level or above. To get to watch our shows in advance of the public, please join at our $10 level. That gets you all the perks. If you join our channel memberships, you need to check our community page here on YouTube in order to get the links to the secret videos and other perks. If you're in the PayPal subscribers club, Peter will email you all the news and links himself. Once joining the PayPal club, which is Peter's homemade club, please give him a chance to see that you've joined and to compose you a personal welcome email, as none of that is automated. But whichever you join, we'll name you an executive producer for the next available episode. Do you have a scary experience that you'd like to share with us? You can email us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or call our Scary Stories voicemail hotline at 804-LA-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. It's a Google voicemail box, so that means it keeps cutting off after every 3 minutes. If your story is longer than that, please keep calling back and we can piece it together on our end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
more scary stories.